what have we got left? We've got nothing. We're living in a delusional, psychotic, post-modern, post-apocalyptic nightmare. And we are very close to that right now.
How many women have you met in their 50s that are like, oh my gosh, I regret not getting married? I have literally met 2 women like this. Full-on depression, just sad, home. And you know what happens? They become psychologically messed up too.
You can be an excellent surgeon, but a bad person with horrible ideas, utter confusion, and disrespect for societal norms. In fact, I couldn't care less whether my surgeon is a nice guy. I want my surgeon to be a competent surgeon.
I started to see red flags of what was happening when God was removed from schools. That was the biggest red flag that I went, oh, why?
This attack on courage, attack on risk-taking, we're entrenched in the fear mindset, the compliance mindset that I'll do whatever I need to do to avoid pain, as opposed to taking risks and doing good. And we don't have a lot of people available to do that anymore.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I wanted to introduce to you guys a very special human being, a gentleman that I have been very, very excited to have on the show. Dr. Mark McDonald, board-certified child and adult psychiatrist and best-selling author. Dr. McDonald and I talked about feminism. Today's topic was a little bit heavy, but very interesting and incredibly intriguing. We talked about the damages of feminism. We talked about masculinity. We talked about feminism. We talked about feminists being submissive and what that really looks like. We talked about homeschooling, the importance of homeschooling. He's a big advocate for homeschooling, actually, you guys. I think that many parents are trying to decide if public system, private system, or homeschooling is right for them. I think from today's episode, you're going to get a really good, substantial amount of information of the importance of homeschooling and that it's not so damaging, because our anxieties can tell us that the social piece, the piece where socialization is important, but he talks about otherwise. So his thoughts and the research and the data that he presents is fascinating. We did talk about transgenderism and the whole woke movement and what that looks like. Is it truly damaging our society as conservatives, as Christian conservatives? It was really interesting to hear his thoughts as a board-certified psychiatrist. So stay tuned. It is an intense conversation. It does have some triggering points to it. So if you feel that anything from LGBTQ community conversations are going to be a trigger for you, just be mindful that throughout the topic of the podcast, it is discussed profusely, but it is very educational. It is very interesting. And thank you for joining me. Make sure you guys subscribe because it is such support to me. Thank you guys for always supporting the truth and supporting me. All right, Dr. Mark McDonald, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor. Yes, absolutely. I found you on Instagram. I love your work. And I'm going to have you obviously explain everything, but I just wanted to say that I have such respect for clinicians and physicians and anybody that's in the clinical world that is fond of truth. And I love how you speak truthful things. You post truthful things. So I definitely appreciate that about you.
I tell my patients that the first point of departure for us to work together is that you must accept truth.
Wow, yes.
If you can't do that, then you can't work with me. And I've adopted that for every patient I've seen in the last 10, 12 years since I opened my practice. And I really use that to guide what I put out publicly, opinion statements. I don't intentionally put out anything provocative, although a lot of what I say is provocative, but the intent is not to be provocative. The intent is to expose something that I believe to be truthful. And if it provokes, well, that's just the consequence of putting something out that people are uncomfortable with or that are shocked by. But I'm not a shock social media person. I know that you can get a lot of likes and follows doing that, but that's not really my goal. My goal is really to wake people up to important subjects that they may not be aware of.
Do you think that clinicians are doing a good job with waking people up? with truth. What's your perspective on that?
I think it's gotten so bad now that
Mm-hmm.
rule of thumb, I usually estimate about 80% of clinicians, when I say clinician, I mean physicians, psychiatrists, therapists,
Yes.
associated paraprofessionals, psychiatric, nursing staff. I'd say about 80% of them are incompetent.
Yes.
That's a pretty high number, but that's what
Wow.
I believe. And I look at that in my Rolodex. My Rolodex is about 80% smaller than it was 5 years ago. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because those people that have been removed are largely people that I've lost confidence in their ability
Mm-hmm.
to work honestly with their patients and to do the best for their patient, regardless of what it might cost them professionally or financially.
I agree. And I don't think that schools are doing a good job with that
I
either.
completely agree. It
I
starts in the training programs.
I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I remember what I learned in my therapy school, my master's program, but not a darn thing is used when you're actually treating a patient. Okay, there's wonderful theoretical approaches, but and I'm going to get so much hate on this. But I'm speaking from my personal experience. I don't use any of that. I think it's more about wisdom. It's what's worked 100 years before this. I think a lot of things are changed and school system is rigged. It brainwashes you completely.
You can be an excellent surgeon, but a bad person with horrible
Yes.
ideas and utter confusion and disrespect for societal norms, but be an excellent surgeon because it's all technical. In
Hmm.
fact, I couldn't care less whether my surgeon is a nice guy. I want my
Right.
surgeon to be a
Competent.
competent surgeon.
Competent.
But with therapists, it's not so cut and dry because therapy, psychiatry, medicine that requires relational
Hmm.
work is necessarily driven by who you are as well
Yes.
as what you do technically, because you're not touching your patients. It's the only medical profession where you don't touch your patients, the only one. So something is going on that's not technical
Hmm.
in a physical sense. That
More
is,
power there, right?
it's also there's a huge amount, I'd say much more power in the mental health field than there is
That's
in the
right.
surgical field. You have the ability to not manipulate someone's body, but manipulate how they think, how they grow, how they develop, their views,
Yes.
their beliefs. That's a much, much more
Yes.
impressive responsibility than simply cutting into somebody. So we should be even more careful in
Yes.
training programs about instilling foundational bedrock principles of morality, guidance, um, patient beneficence.
Yes.
And on the converse, if we don't do that, and we're not, programs that instill bad ideas are likely to produce much more harm than ideologically corrupted surgical training programs. As long as you get the good training on where to cut and where to sew, it doesn't really matter what ideas they teach you. But in therapy, if you get bad ideas, if you're told, for example, that it's in your patient's best interest to always affirm whatever the patient proposes, you
Yeah.
are going to be a bad therapist and you're going to hurt people. And that is exactly what therapists are doing right now.
I agree with you. Validating a lot of these mixed emotions, especially with everything happening in the woke culture right now. There's so many therapists validating this idea of, okay, you feel this way? All right. Oh, that's so unfortunate that your family's not accepting of this and that. And it's what the heck are we validating? What are we doing? We're hurting these children. How is it okay to validate a child that is so confused and traumatized and help? I
We're
don't even have
validating
words to
pathology.
say.
We have redefined pathology into virtue. I have been speaking about this now for 4 years, really loudly in the last couple of years. And one of my common tenets that I try to express and clarify for people who may not be aware of this is that we may not know this, not consciously, but we're living it all the time. Since 2020, we have redefined a lot of human qualities that used to be considered pernicious into
Hmm.
virtues. One of them, for example, is fear. We have
Hmm.
we have validated, virtualized fear as something good, something to be proud of. This is terrible.
Yes.
Fear does not produce goodness. Courage produces goodness, the ability to risk things. earlier we were discussing the fears of therapists of losing their patients if they say the
Yes.
truth, and the therapist is
Losing a client fear,
losing
right?
if you lose your patient, well, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad therapist. It may mean that you said the right thing. So fear
Correct.
can't drive therapy. Fear can't drive how we parent. We can't be angry or worried about our child saying, I hate you because you don't give him pizza every night for dinner. And parents instinctively know this.
Hmm.
So this is not something new, but I think what is new is that we've been blitzed by a very coordinated political, media, and corporate campaign in the last 4 years
Hmm.
that has changed our way of seeing things in our families, in our professions, in our society, in our politics, everywhere, that says if you express fear, if you say I'm scared, and if you feel victimized by something, anything, anyone, because of your fear, that makes you a good person.
Right.
This is wrong.
It's wrong, but also there's consequences that come from speaking the truth. Earlier we were talking about how important it is to be a good therapist and to tell your client what you really see. But there's consequences behind that. For example, like losing the client, but also from the parent's perspective as well. What comes with telling your child you can't have pizza every night? It's the severe tantrums. It's I'm going to run away from home. So I think with fear also, but there's these consequences that are so obvious now, and it's really difficult for people to do the right thing, to say the right thing. Like, look at us now, we're talking, right? But how much controversy is in this conversation? People are not going to like that. This is going to come with consequences. And the consequence
Yes.
is losing followers. People see you out in the street like, how dare you? Transgender people are people. They deserve to be validated. They deserve to be loved. It's like there's always consequences, and we're always fighting for this acceptance.
This is why we have to reinstill courage as a virtue and not fear. We have
Yes.
swapped out our altar of worship to
Hmm.
one where we worship fear. That's our new God.
It
We
is.
cannot be a good people if we live under the umbrella of fear, if that's what drives our decisions. The only way to accept consequences, losses, is through courage. And it doesn't mean that you have to change how you feel. This is also a big misconception I hear. Well, because feelings drive everything, and because feelings are always affirmed and validated, people today, and this includes therapists, seem to believe that the road to goodness is by riding feelings and accepting them and acting on the feelings. No, that's immaturity. The road to goodness is to feel the feelings and to act in spite of them, to feel scared, horribly terrified, and yet to do the right thing. And that is actually what courage is.
It
It's to
is.
act
It is.
in spite of fear and to take a risk. And we're not willing to do that anymore. That's one of the fundamental problems of our society that is infecting everything.
Infecting.
Everything.
Wow. Yes. I agree with you. And the, I think that it's definitely people who are afraid and people who live in fear are immense danger for society. That's what I feel. Like it's a very dangerous. I guess what I'm trying to say is one of the most dangerous people in the world are weak people, are people who are afraid. Look at all the dangerous things that they do based from fear and being weak. Like how all these murderers, rapists, robbers, like just bad people, they're all people who have immense fear. And I think it's really difficult to be a courageous person, but it's the most beautiful thing to be a courageous person. It takes a lot of work to be a courageous person. But I guess what I'm trying to say is courageous people are amazing people. They are good for society. They do so much kindness for society versus fear.
They're necessary. The
They're
fearful act
necessary.
irrationally, and irrational behavior is what causes harm. And you can be a nice person, but be very scared, very afraid, and act very
Yes.
irrationally. I believe that the outliers today, the eccentrics, the weirdos, are really the only ones that are doing good. Those who are acting
Yes.
in the middle, those who are compliant, those who are being safe,
Yeah.
are largely causing terrible harm. We need
Very.
much more strength and much more courage. And to be specific about that, I think what we must have are courageous, strong men supported by women who respect and admire them. And we don't have that right now. We have only toxic masculinity.
Yes.
We don't have masculinity. Everything is toxic that's masculine. And we also don't have a societal paternal authority, whether it's a father or a police officer or a state or a teacher, that can tell girls no.
Mm-hmm.
Girls don't have strong daddies anymore. And I mean that in the literal sense and the metaphorical sense. So they end up acting out. They end up acting out in a selfish, narcissistic, histrionic way. I believe that women are disproportionately, as a sex, disproportionately destroying this country. And I also believe that it is enabled by weak men. So I want to be very clear. I'm not attacking women. I'm attacking both sexes. But we attack men, and rightly so, all the time for excessive aggression, violence, sexual predation, as we should. But we never, ever criticize women for their errors, for their
Yes.
sex-specific flaws, which are largely uncontrolled, uncontained emotion, which explodes and leaks out into horribly destructive areas, such as the sexual mutilation and
Yes.
hormonal castration of young children, most of whom are girls, and most of which is led by women. Women therapists, women teachers, women surgeons, women clinical directors, women politicians, women legislators. Even mothers in families are largely driving this, not men, not fathers. Of course, the fathers, they're just standing around letting it happen. So I'm not saying that they're guiltless or blameless, but I'm saying they're not stepping up. And we need strong, ethical men to stand up and to contain the excesses of what I would call toxic femininity.
Yes.
And we have lost that balance in our society.
We do.
And if we don't get it back, we are gonna fall as a nation. We are already teetering. And we are very close to the precipice. So our problems today, we could say, oh, the political divide, a lot of politics. Politics is a symptom of an underlying problem. The underlying problem is much more cultural. It's much more foundational to psychology, values, community. And we're not addressing that. We're bickering about Republicans and Democrats. That's not the solution. The solution has to come back to the core, to the community, the family, to our values. We have to agree on that.
Yes.
We have to agree on truth. And if we don't allow truth to take precedence, if we don't say, you know what, men don't menstruate, girls
Right.
can't be boys and boys can't be girls. If we're afraid to say that as a mommy, a daddy, a teacher, a therapist, in our office, at our home, on the street, if we are afraid to say that those basic truths, what have we got left? We've got nothing. We're living in a delusional, psychotic, post-modern, post-apocalyptic nightmare. And we are very close to that right now.
And I think that the root cause of that is women losing touch with their nature,
I
their
completely
true
agree.
nature.
Yeah.
And what worked for our grandparents, what worked for our parents is now altered into this new wave of feminism. And that's, you don't have to work. You don't have to get married. Who cares about raising children? Well, that's the most important thing, is giving birth and raising children. Our children are today's society. Look at the responsibility that we possess. And we're not really looking at that as important. We're looking as, oh, if I have this career, that career. Yes, that too is also important. I understand that some women want to work, but we forgot our true nature. And that's destroying today's society, including our
Yes.
men. We are also destroying our men.
We are attacking our men by this false redefinition of what it means to be a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter how you feel, it doesn't matter what you believe. There is a truth and a reality that exists independent of you. And this is another problem
Mm-hmm.
with the narcissistic culture, is that rather than minimizing, humbling ourselves and acknowledging that we are really, as individuals, insignificant in this larger world, we are focusing so much on our own individual feelings and so-called needs that we are denying what is real. And that always leads to terrible things, including, as you said, the near total loss now, at least in the United States and largely in Western Europe and other Anglophone countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and England, the understanding of what the reality is, not the political opinion, the reality, the truth of female nature. And there is a female nature and there is a male nature, whether you like it or not.
not.
It exists. And the sort of pinnacle of the the delusional upheaval of that concept of feminine nature is today the massive proclamation that a woman can not only deny her nature psychologically, but even physically. She can become a man. That's almost to me like it kind of reminds me of the Greek stories of hubris, like the man who can fly. He wants to be a bird, but he can't really be a bird, so he takes wings and he glues them to his arms with wax, and he flies up to the heavens. And the sun, the god sun, sun god, calls him out for his hubris. He says, you're a man, you're not a bird, and I'm going to increase the intensity of the sun, and I'm going to melt that wax so that you fall to your death, to prove to you, to show to you that you can't cheat nature.
That you're delusional.
That you are delusional. You are not actually flying. You are just putting on wings and saying that you're a bird. And that's what happens right now biologically and psychologically with children, young adults and adults. I think this is why I keep coming back to this issue of transgenderism, because I think it's the most obvious expression, the most cut and dried expression of the consequence of denying one's female nature and also to some degree one's male nature.
How, I always think of this, how do you look yourself as a clinician in the mirror at the end of the day when you're validating someone's delusion? How is that proper treatment? How's that ethical in any way? I just can't seem to understand that. And it's, I think it's much deeper than that. Again, it goes back to the fear. It's the fear and the consequence of clinicians and what they experience. Look at all the consequences. I mean, Jordan Peterson, we were just talking about this, had his license stripped away from all that hard work, all because he's talking about what we're talking about.
He told the truth.
He told the truth.
He told the truth about men and about women.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what he did. And he was attacked mercilessly for that by saying that women and men are fundamentally different, that women aspire to different achievements than men do, that women are emotionally different and have different emotional capacities. Obviously, men and women are physically different, that what makes men happy doesn't make women happy, and that fundamentally women cannot be happy by pursuing I will have everything right now path. It makes them miserable. And he just said these basic truths that 100 years ago, she said our grandparents, our great-grandparents would roll our eyes at and say, well, duh, why are you even mentioning this?
Even in some countries now.
Even in some countries now.
They're not fully aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
They're, what do you mean a man can be a woman? I mean, I've seen some videos on this where they're just, what? So it's, can we talk about the aftermath of surgery?
That is a really ugly but unfortunately expanding topic and consequence of the transgender cult, which has destroyed the lives of not just hundreds but thousands of young people and probably tens of thousands of adults as well, which I think is equally bad. The images, videos are available if you actually go to libs of TikTok or some on Instagram, although they're often taken down, where these youngsters who have had these surgeries will video themselves, usually initially in an expression of pride, although not always. Sometimes the videos are of them crying, looking at their bodies and seeing the mutilation. They're pretty ugly. They look a lot like the pictures that I have seen of cancer surgeries.
Yes.
Horrible scarring, inflammation, swelling, oozing fluids from body cavities, lack of functionality, obviously aesthetically horrific. There's nothing pretty about surgically removing healthy breasts and leaving a flat chest with a scar underneath it.
On a child.
And this is often on children. These are on pre-pubescent girls.
Yes.
To have these genitalia removed, have the penis removed and have it inverted to create a vagina, or to put on a prosthetic penis onto a vagina, creates horrible pain, strictures, urinary retention, obvious infertility and sexual impotence for life. These are catastrophic,
It's not human nature to
life-changing.
do this.
No,
How
this
do
is.
they do this?
I don't understand how any clinician, surgeon, therapist can actively support this kind of intervention. This is not sexually affirming or gender affirming. This is gender denying.
Mhm.
This is saying we are going to deny your actual sex and gender as a woman,
Yes.
and we're going to put on this sort of costume-like but permanent disfigurement that's going to presumptively switch you into the opposite sex, which is absurd. I don't think many Americans realize that all of these so-called treatments lead to nothing that is promised. Absolutely nothing. Physically, they are abominable. And psychologically, and this has been proven and shown through some of the largest studies, the only ones we really have available in Denmark and the Netherlands, in Europe, longitudinal studies with 70, 80, 100,000 people through their sort of VA equivalent healthcare system, tracking people with what they call gender dysphoria, who have had these surgeries and hormone blockers, and those who haven't. They found conclusively that the rates of depression and even suicide are up to 19-fold higher in those who have undergone these so-called treatments than those who didn't, who also had gender dysphoria. So clearly these treatments are not only not helping, they're actually making things worse. And that's just an objective fact. That's not an opinion. So we can't even medically support this, much less obviously morally or ethically. And for us to have a system that encourages this as your first go-to option when you're suffering from a mental illness is evil. I don't know any other word that can describe this. This is not an error. This is not a medical confusion area of debate where we're wondering, well, the data is not fully in yet. We have to do our due. No, this is absolutely, I would call it catastrophic to the development of the next generation of adults, that if we don't stop this, we could lead down a road where we have a non-functioning society.
Yeah.
It's that bad. This is an issue that all Americans should be united.
It's wake up.
This is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up time. And we haven't woken up, which is funny because every other country seems to have woken up. England has already ended, legally ended,
Yes,
these
some
so-called
countries
transition clinics. The Tavistock Clinic was shut down, I think, a year and a half ago after class action lawsuits. And the courts actually found that medically it was indefensible. And they said, we're not doing this anymore. Same thing in France, Spain, Italy. They're not doing any of this in Western Europe. So why are we continuing that? Why are we so far behind the eight ball? I think the reason is that we are probably the most fearful and compliant nation in the entire world right now, which
Very
is the opposite.
agreeable people we are as
we want to
Americans.
be so agreeable. And we used to be disagreeable. We used to
Yes,
be
what happened?
pioneering. We used to be aggressive. We used to break through forests and ice and climb mountains. And we used to take risks. We used to tell off the rest of the world when they were wrong and said, you know what, come after us. We know that we're right. You could call that hubris, you could call that arrogance, but at least it was strong. And we did overall the most good in human history, the United States did. And I have to say, ashamedly, we are the exporters of some of the worst ideas now in human history. It is so pathetic.
It is pathetic.
I feel very ashamed of my country right now.
I do too. And I think that the worst part is that there's a lot of corruption behind it too. A lot of corruption, because look at how much you're praised for accepting these ideas and validating these ideas, and you get glorified for it. Like, certain mayors, like they bring like drag queens into schools, and they're glorified for it. So
That's correct.
They're glorified for it. So there's a lot of corruption behind it too. It's not only, I don't think corruption. I think that's such a big word, and there's so much into that. But I see the corruption.
We've allowed corruption to drive a lot of evil because we've agreed to centralize a lot of our society, and I mean centralized power, political power, centralized media,
Mm-hmm.
which media has a lot of power as well, centralized businesses. I mean, look what happened after 2020. 30% of all
Yeah.
independently run businesses went bankrupt and
Mm-hmm.
have not restarted. 1/3. Amazon, for the first time in history, a company, Amazon, in 2020, 2021, grossed more than $1 billion, with a B, billion dollars per day.
Per day?
Amazon was the most successful corporation in US history in 2020, 2021. And why? Because we didn't allow people to buy things outside of Amazon, because we had to get stuff delivered to our house. 1 billion gross per day in sales. Never happened before in United States history. Now, was that because Amazon suddenly, between 2019 and 2020, 2021, suddenly became a great company offering wonderful value and excellent customer service, and everyone else stopped serving their customers? No, this was forced on us by a corrupt media, a corrupt government, and really corrupt politicians.
Politicians, yes.
This
Amen.
is how this happened. And we haven't really recovered from this. We haven't recovered from the lockdown era. We've recovered in the sense that we're now out and about, but I don't think psychologically we've recovered. We economically haven't recovered. We haven't recovered developmentally with the children, educationally. Everything has continued to suffer. And I think that there's still a holdover effect of this fear and this attack on courage, attack on risk-taking. We're entrenched in the fear mindset, the compliance mindset that I'll do whatever I need to do to avoid pain,
Yeah.
as opposed to taking risks and doing good. And we don't have a lot of people available to do that anymore, because all the people that were courageous, that were taking risks, the independent businesses, they're all gone.
They're
So everything is consolidated. And I think when you centralize and consolidate anything at all, bad outcomes. And I think we are more consolidated and centralized on all these fields I just mentioned than any other time in US history. So presumably, the solution would be to break all of this up, to decentralize, to put power back to communities, whether it's education, parenting, politics, media. We need to break stuff up, because when you don't have competition and you have a centralization of power, you wind up getting really dictatorship. You wind up getting rules coming from on high that enforce edicts that do not benefit the population. You don't have the benefit of 300 million minds all acting independently but in concert. You have 1, 2, 10, 20, maybe 100 minds,
Mhm.
which is way
Mhm.
less, all making decisions for us. And you can see the outcome of this. You just look around and just look what's happening to our country. You don't have to even watch the news. You just walk around your streets and just see how the
Yeah.
decay has taken over in the
Okay,
last 4 years.
and just children being brainwashed all the time. You had
Yeah.
posted something about homeschooling. Are you a fan of homeschooling?
I didn't used to be. I used to be actually very suspicious of it. I thought it was for crazy moms.
I'm one of those crazy moms, I think.
Well, let me tell you how
I mean, my son's in
totally
private
changed.
school, but yeah, tell me. What?
I after the schools closed
Mhm.
in 2020, 2021, and I had 1, then 2, then 3 of my patients commit suicide. Well,
No.
I should say commit suicide. They experimented with drugs and died of fentanyl poisonings, but they were also depressed and anxious while they were at the safer at home policy by Eric Garcetti, our former LA mayor
Mhm.
here. After I saw that happening, that really woke me up. Kids need to be in school. But when I say in school, I mean in a school that is not turning them into transgendered mutants. So I was really for kids going back to school. But what I realized was that when kids were going back to school finally after the openings, yeah, they were safe in the sense that they weren't dying of fentanyl overdoses, at least not as frequently as they were at home. But they were completely, and still are, completely, utterly indoctrinated by ideals pushed on them by teachers that are ordered by the
Mhm.
California Teachers Union,
Fear.
the National Teachers Association. Exactly.
Mhm.
If they don't teach XYZ, then they will lose their job, they will be fired.
course.
And that means gay pride, transgenderism, America is a racist country, men are toxic, girls can do no wrong, religion is horrible. you don't have to eat and sleep and eat well to be happy. In fact, the fatter you are, the better. Fat pride. So you get all of this horrible, unhealthy.
Normalizing all these
It's a
unhealthy things.
normalization,
Yes.
exactly. They've normalized everything that's bad. They've removed the civic culture of school. And so I don't think in public schools today, certainly not in LA County, and this is true in a lot of parts of urban America, I don't think it's even remotely possible to do well and to do right by your child by keeping them in school. So when parents come in and they say, I'm having a real horrible time here, Dr. McDonald, my kids had to wear masks, they had to get these injections. And I said, no, but now they're back and they're still, the teachers are acting really strange and they're teaching them all this garbage about boys can be girls, girls can be boys, and pronoun changes and gay pride. And there's no American flags in the schools. And I'm not a conservative, I'm not even a Republican, but I just don't like this. This is wrong. This isn't what I grew up with. What should I do? And I tell them, look, you may not like this, but getting back to truth, this is the truth. You must, if you want to be a good parent and you want to have your child grow up to be a good adult, you must take your child out of school and homeschool your child, period. Now, if you find by some act of God an excellent private school in your area or a charter school, and they do exist, there's not many, but there are a few. There are a few. If you're in that category, great. But if not, and that's most people, you must homeschool your child. Whether that means you have to quit your job, go part-time, lose one income, move perhaps to an area that's cheaper, downsize, whatever it takes, you have to do that. Because if you don't, in a few years, you're going to look back and say, oh my God, my child is a wreck. But we still have the house and the job, and it's not going to matter. You're going to be miserable because that house, that income, that is not going to matter to you as a parent if you don't raise a good child. And you cannot raise a good child today if your child is in public school. It is an insurmountable obstacle.
I agree with you. And I think that's one of the reasons why I took out my son from public school. He was in public school here in Burbank, and I just, we found a beautiful Christian private school. There's literally like 9 kids in his class. Very private, very small, but it's so meaningful. And but what about when parents talk about the socialization piece? Like, what about socializing? That laugh says it all. So talk to us about that.
That
Dr.
was
McDonald.
actually where I first reached the now, I'd say, rejected conclusion that homeschooling is detrimental to children's development. I was always under the belief that you raise like autistic children in homeschooling. They're all weird.
They're all weird.
They just they don't know how to interact with other people. Well, that was a complete misconception, and I acknowledge that, because homeschooled children don't sit at home all day long by themselves with their mother doing homework exercises. Often they're with other kids. They often do community group work. And even if they are doing their schoolwork by themselves, that schoolwork doesn't take 8 hours. It only takes 2 or 3 hours a day because it's so much more efficient than the public schools, which really don't have a lot of class instruction time. It's mostly nonsense. So the rest of that time is usually, if the mother is in any way involved, and of course she has to be or she wouldn't be homeschooling, in the programming of her child, she's going to spend an enormous amount of time taking that child out to outings and trips with other children, going to museums, doing sports, enrichment activities, music, art. That actually is what predominantly fills the time of homeschooling kids, rather than sitting alone at their desk doing busy work. So that's just false. It's a misconception.
I agree.
And I have met a lot of children from public schools and from homeschool. And you can see them running around the neighborhood too. The children that come from homeschools are the most mature in their social skills. They make eye contact, they shake hands, they address adults and other kids properly. They are respectful, they are thoughtful, they are attentive, they are gracious. They just look at the
confidence levels.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Because they're not bullied.
They're not bullied. They're not on their phones all day.
Bullied,
They're not having their emotional needs corrupted and driven into political, ideological campaigns. They're living and growing with this wonderful nutritional environment of other kids and adults who share similar points of view and values about the world, which are basically values grounded in reality. And they just turn out better. This is just empirically true. You look at the results, And you can see the results. Homeschooled kids are not dorky and goofy. They're actually quite involved. They take on leadership roles to a much, much larger degree as they get older than do kids in public schools. So this concept of socialization being a weakness of homeschooling is actually not only false, it's inverted. The socialization in public schools is horrific. They're socialized to be scared, to be bullies or to be bullied. They're socialized to be compliant, weak, to not express an opinion that contradicts that of the teacher. Like, well, I don't understand why do men menstruate if they don't have a vagina? You are a transphobe. Go to the principal's office and sit there for the rest of the day. That's what's going on in public schools. And so what is that kid going to do the next time? It's nod his head. The next time he says, yeah, men menstruate. Absolutely, yes, I'll put that down on my test. That's not good socialization at all.
No.
To be scared and intimidated into adopting a worldview that's literally delusional. I think, again, getting back to reality, how important it is to live in reality. Children that are homeschooled spend more time in reality than those in public schools. Just like kids that were taken out of public schools during the lockdowns and allowed to play, touch dirt, touch other kids, play ball, which is reality, they had a better development without loss of IQ points, language deficits, and even a stronger immune system, ironically, because they were out touching things and interacting with the environment, as opposed to public school kids who got weaker emotionally, linguistically, intellectually, and physically.
I agree with you. I think that parents definitely need to take better charge. They're very afraid to be parents.
Parents are so scared right now.
They're so scared, and it's so understandable. And especially the ones that are not really aware, they don't really understand what's going on. They're higher, they're more agreeable. And I feel for parents like that, especially immigrant parents.
Agreeability, as Jordan Peterson says, is a much higher character trait in women than in men. And women often make the decisions on where children go to school.
Absolutely.
And I think women want to be agreeable, and right now to be agreeable
it's
means
easier, though.
It is easier. It's less stressful.
It is.
It's less conflictual.
It's hard to
you
be
avoid
courageous
fights
and
by
fight.
being agreeable. So it makes your life easier, at least in the short run.
Especially if they have trauma, intergenerational trauma, and their nervous system acts up. I mean, it's so much easier to be like, okay, versus constantly fighting, Which
is funny because all the immigrant mothers that I meet are the ones that are the most worried about what's happening to their children. They don't always act on it because they're scared. They want to be agreeable, but they know what's going on because they came from countries where similar kinds of abuse was taking place by government. That's why they left. I just met with a couple of Armenian women in my office yesterday who were working for a pharmaceutical company. And she said, I came from a very difficult environment. One was Russian Armenian. And we fled our land where we were living because we were feeling unsafe. We were feeling that we couldn't keep our children protected. And we come here, and now we have to throw them to the wolves? What do I do? Again, what do I do? What do I do comes up. It's not that they don't know. They know very well, even much more than American-born women today. They know that something's terribly wrong because they lived what was wrong before. So they have that ability to recognize it. They just sometimes don't have the tools, the strength, the courage, and most importantly, the community.
The support system.
The support system to take action. I've said, when people asked me 3 years ago, what's the one thing that I should do to keep myself from going crazy in the midst of this insanity? And I said, you need to find like-minded people and you need to associate with them. Preferably in person in your community, but if not, then remotely through websites, through blogs, through chat groups. It's not ideal, but church is absolutely. You can do online church now. And I'm not a big fan of online anything, but if you don't have any other option, it's absolutely better than nothing. Because if you don't have that support of people with like-minded ideas, you will not be able to find the courage to do what's right. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means the human nature is that alone, very, very, very few people are able to step up to that barricade and take all that incoming fire if there's no one standing behind them or beside them. Very, very few can do it. And I don't fault people for not wanting to jump up to the barricade. We don't want everyone to do that. But everyone needs to find some way to become courageous, and that starts with getting like-minded people together. We don't have PTAs anymore. PTAs are gone. They've all been taken over by teachers' unions. So, parents who come to meetings at schools are often shouted down, arrested even, referred
Yes.
to social services. I mean, this is real hardcore
It's that
Marxism here.
consequence. It is
This is a
Marxism.
real consequence. This is not
Yes.
just feeling like, oh, people don't like me. I mean, to have a police officer handcuff you, give you a civil fine, have you referred to social services because you come to a teacher's or a PTA school meeting with a book that has pornography, that has graphic descriptions of anal sex for your 5-year-old and say, I don't want this to be taught or even allowed to be in the library, in my kindergarten, at my school, and then to be arrested for that, that's pretty darn scary.
It's very scary. It's again goes back to those consequences. There's always a consequence for speaking up for your truth. And also, I'd like to add, there's this Jill Simonian. I don't know if you know her, but she works for
do know her.
PragerU. She's one of my good friends. We were talking, and she's like, "There's this like thing of be kind, be kind, be kind." Well, who's going to be kind to us? What about us? Like, I deserve the love. I deserve to be respected. My opinions deserve to be respected. Who's going to do that for? Why is it always the opponent? Like, what about us as conservatives?
Inclusion, sensitivity,
Yes.
acceptance is not a one-way street.
No.
And the only people today that are being excluded are those who profess what we would call traditional values. If you don't profess a traditional value, you're not excluded. I was laughing the last, 30, 60, 90, I can't even remember how long it's been. Pride Month is all year now. And you have the Pride slogan of, we need to be visible. Pride Month is important because we need visibility. Well, I can't think of a group that is not not the most visible group in the United States, but out gay men and women, in particular transvestites and transgendered people. Where can you not see them? I mean, it's not like they're hiding in the closet. So the whole thing is it's a joke. It's a lie. It's dishonest. The people who are hiding, the people who are not out, the people who are intimidated to express their views and to march on the streets are heterosexual Christians.
Yes.
They're scared to death.
And by the way, we're doing a horrible job speaking up. We need to,
Yes, we are.
we need to, you guys, we need to be more out there. We need to be more loud. And I mean, there's a few of us that are speaking up about it. I'm very grateful, but a lot of them are very afraid, again, because of these consequences, like losing jobs, friends. You know, do you ever think about your license?
Well, I was investigated by the California Medical Board formally in 2021 for spreading medical misinformation. That was the charge. And it wasn't brought by a patient. It was brought by anonymous parties who didn't like what I'd posted on Twitter regarding the use of ivermectin to treat the Wuhan virus infection. And the medical board took that anonymous complaint up and filed a board-based complaint against me that went on for over a year and ultimately led to an investigation by an investigator and a physician who is hired by the medical board to conduct an interview to decide whether or not I had actually spread medical misinformation.
Well, congratulations. I think that's very successful.
I told the guy that interviewed me, I'm so glad that we're having this opportunity to discuss the information I posted on social media, which included citing research articles about how ivermectin was a successful treatment around the world that saved millions of lives and that led to a Nobel Prize. Right? Well, now you can still prescribe it. You can only prescribe it for very specific disorders. So they still have it kind of restricted even now in 2024.
People are getting it from Mexico.
You can get it from Mexico. You can get it from overseas.
Yes. People know where to get it.
It's still available, but it's not nearly as easy to prescribe as it used to be. And you get a lot of pushback from insurance companies and so forth. And the medical board backed down because they realized that there really wasn't anything that they could call me out for having harmed patients because everything that I said was medically valid. It also might have had a little bit to do with, that is, dropping this, my lawsuit. I filed a federal lawsuit, McDonald versus Lawson. Christina Lawson is the former head of the medical board. She's an attorney, not a doctor, and she was at the time the head of the medical board of California. And I filed it in federal court, challenging the AB, I think it's 2098, that is now expired and defunct and actually
Wow.
rescinded by the California state legislature, which criminalized the truth telling to patients regarding anything coronavirus, whether it was masks or injections
Mm-hmm.
or antiviral medication. If you said anything that went against the state's position at that moment, which of course changed all the time, you could be not criminally, but medically prosecuted and have your license stripped from you. And
Oh
that went
my
into effect
goodness.
in January of about a year and a half ago, I think. It was then rescinded by the state because they realized it was unconstitutional. But I filed a lawsuit against her personally and Rob Bonta, the state attorney general, on constitutional grounds. And it was heard in the Pasadena, I forgot what circuit that is, a federal court about a year ago. And the panel of judges grilled the defense attorney, which was the state attorney,
Mm-hmm.
asking questions like, well, why do we need this rule to go after physicians who are practicing medical misinformation? Don't we have malpractice law already? Well, yes, we do, but why do we have to have one law for the specific disease? This feels very political. Well, you have to understand, Judge, the people on the panel weren't buying it, and I think the state realized that they were in a losing battle, so it was taken into consideration for decision. Before the decision was written and published, the state dropped the investigation against me, and the legislature voted to rescind their own law. AB 2098 was rescinded. And once that happened, my lawsuit became moot. And so there was never a decision rendered. But I would consider it a win.
Yes.
We won on both counts. I certainly won the investigation. I won the lawsuit in a sense because I think they would have had a formal loss if the decision had come out. My only regret or sadness here is that we didn't get a decision, because had we got a decision, it would have pushed for a national court level
Oh man.
appeal and then national decision, hopefully with the Supreme Court. We were hoping to get that would have formally stated and issued an opinion to America that as a government cannot enact laws that restrict speech for any profession, whether it's an attorney or a physician. And there are a lot of professional speech codes that are now coming out through professional organizations like state bar associations, state medical associations, that are restricting the speech of those people who participate in their associations. And so their justification is essentially, well, if it's professional speech, we can restrict it. And the court in California was about to issue a judgment saying, you know what, just because you put on a coat or you go to the court as an attorney, a white coat, or go to the court, that doesn't mean that you can't talk anymore. When you walk into your consulting office, your speech rights are not restricted. It doesn't work like that. We have a First Amendment. So I would love for that to be a Supreme Court decision, because I think that speech
Yes.
restrictions right now are one of the primary tools that is instilling fear in people.
Well, of
If
course.
you can't speak freely,
No.
then you can't act. And that's why the First Amendment is the first, because if you don't have the ability to speak, the right to speak that's protected by the state, all your other rights are lost.
Well, certainly in this country, free speech is promoted, but it certainly isn't supported.
That's correct. It is not supported
It
at
is
all.
not supported. It's promoted,
Not-
but it's not. It's there, quote unquote, but it's not supported.
It's promoted and supported based on the content that you say. So if you're a anti-Semitic, pro-terrorist UCLA student occupying Royce Hall and wants to execute all the Jews and give money to Iran to fund terrorism in the Middle East, then you have the absolute right and support of the university to speak that loudly and clearly, and even to destroy the entire building with graffiti and feces and food and broken windows and chairs, and pitch tents out in front of the building and block students from being able to access the grounds or the building. That is absolutely defended, supported. But if you were to walk past the building with a megaphone and say, I'm a proud Jew, and hold a flag up of Israel, you would probably be escorted off the campus by the police, because you would be instilling a riot or instigating a riot. So I think we have a huge double standard right now in terms of support for free speech. Speech is absolutely right, except when we don't like it. And then it's banned. In other words, any speech is great as long as it's not hate speech, specifically hate speech against us. We can hate against you, Absolutely, but you say anything that we don't like that might make us uncomfortable, and that has to be restricted because once again, we're relying on this narcissistic view of society that if my feelings are hurt, then your speech must be limited. That's a
Mhm.
very, very dangerous
Your
precedent,
speech
isn't it?
is violent.
Your speech is violent.
How,
Words
how
are
many
now
times have you
violent.
heard that before?
We never
My
had
goodness.
this level of corruption of language, and I started speaking
Yeah.
about this a few years ago
Proper
too.
English and language, yes.
We've lost
Mhm.
truth and precision in language. We don't have justice anymore. We have social justice, which is not justice. It's
Mhm.
actually revenge.
Yes.
We don't have equality. We have equity, which is not equality. Equity is theft, getting something that you didn't earn and stealing it from someone else.
Mhm.
We don't have truth. We have affirmation, which is not actually affirming at all. It's actually denying. It's denying reality. We have laws now that have been passed by some school boards. I can't remember what state or what county that actually they were passed. Local cities passed these laws that stated that if you as a parent go to the school board and not even at the school board, if you write a letter, if you issue a campaign, a public proclamation, if you show up at a meeting, and if you make any comments in writing or spoken that make any of the school board members uncomfortable, meaning emotionally upset, you are banned from participating in the school board
Wow.
meetings, you are banned from being on campus physically, and you can be fined civilly.
But they're okay to make us feel,
Apparently, that is completely fine and completely protected.
and has been for a while.
It's amazing, isn't it? I really wish that more Americans, the far left that are pushing contemporary Marxism are lost. They're bad people. But most Americans are not on the far left. They're just in this kind of squishy middle zone. They would call themselves liberals or Democrats or liberal Democrats, whatever you want.
Mhm.
I wish more of the people in that group, so not the conservative group, because we already know what's going on. We
Right,
have been for a
right.
long time. But that 50, 60% in the middle, I'm going to say the left is probably under 20%, maybe under 10. That 60% in the middle, I wish more Americans who are there in that group would start to acknowledge just one basic thing. Just start to acknowledge what's actually happening. Start to acknowledge reality. Start to accept
Mhm.
the truth of what's going on.
Decide.
Just that's all you need to do. I'm not even asking you to agree with me or believe in my opinion. I couldn't care less. I don't want agreement. I want actually conflict. I think we should have more conflict.
Yes, it's so healthy.
We need that healthy conflict in
Yes.
order to find out what's right and wrong. Who's the
Mhm.
winner? Who's the
Mhm.
loser?
Mhm.
So please disagree by all means, but please just bring reality to the table. Bring reality to the ring. Don't come with lies. Don't come with delusions. Don't come with psychoses. Don't create a fictitious world and use that as your straw man argument because we're seeing the results of that path. What this is leading up to. We're seeing this idea that the more money we take from taxes and spend on homelessness, the worse the problem gets. Just acknowledge that first. Then we can talk about how to fix the problem. But you have to acknowledge that what we're doing isn't working. And if it's not working, if what 7%, fewer than 10% of Black students in LAUSD can read and write when they finish high school and are passing grade levels one to the next, that's a
Mhm.
failure. That's an abject failure. Some schools are 0% literate in certain minority
Right.
groups. But these schools are getting more and more and more money. Teachers are getting more and more money. We're spending more on public education in California than any country in the world outside Switzerland. I think it's up to about $16,000 per pupil per year. That is a lot of money. I bet you could use that money as a homeschooling mother and do a much, much better job with it. And yet that's what we're paying in taxes. That's why our property taxes are so high
Yes.
largely. It's to pay for all these outsourced administrative bloat over the schools. We have 60, 100 school administrators for every teacher now in LAUSD. This
Mhm.
is absurd.
It is.
And what are they doing? I have no answer to that question.
We don't know.
We don't know.
You said something earlier. It was interesting. You said conservative side, we knew what was happening. I started to see red flags of what was happening when God was removed from schools.
Yes.
And this was years
Very good
ago.
point.
What was it? Like over 10 years ago, we don't have the
Yeah.
Pledge of Allegiance anymore. That was the biggest red flag that I went, oh, why? And I think
I
we
know
should have
why.
done something then.
The reason
We
why, to
waited
answer your
too
first
long.
question, the reason why it happened, it was, I think, very specific, which is that if you remove God, you remove God as an authority.
Mhm.
And if you remove God as an authority, then you no longer have to follow God's rules. You have to follow the substitute
Yes.
God figure,
Yes.
which is going to be the principal, the politician, the corporation, the media,
That's
the federal
right.
government. That's the reason why it was taken out. And it was also taken out because those who wish to inhabit the delusional fantasy that they are, it's again, getting back to narcissism, the most important, more important, that they are gods.
Mhm.
I am an Instagram influencer with 10 million followers. I am God. Don't tell me that there is someone above me. No one is above me. So that narcissism, the psychological illness, bred the what I would call strategic decision.
Well,
And it was very strategic
yes.
and power-driven to remove God from our entire
Yes.
structure of society, especially in the schools. That way we can bring in not an altar or a flag or a prayer,
It's
but
easier with kids.
much easier. Let's just get a flag with 100 different colors and a board that has 2,500 different sexual gender identities and pronouns. That will be now what we worship. We're going to worship ideology, human-driven ideology. I think that's why it happened. I mean, obviously that didn't happen overnight.
No.
That took years, but
It
that's
did.
where we've come to now. So I think it was very strategic. I think it was driven in part by psychological illness, partly by the corrupt drive for power. And you can see the results. Taking God out of the schools has made us far worse. It has not made us better. It doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not, and whether you're religious or not. And again, getting back to reality, please acknowledge that we are worse off. Now, you can argue whether it's, you like it or don't like it. Same thing with feminism. You can argue whether you like feminism, it doesn't matter. I don't care. But acknowledge that it has wrecked our society. Acknowledge a secular society is a worse society. Acknowledge a feminist-run society is a worse society. Just acknowledge that reality, and then at least we'll be able to then argue and discuss within the world of possible solutions that are all potentially workable, rather than arguing about whether the sun rises in the east or whether it rises in the west. That's a dead end. We're just wasting our time because we already know the truth to that.
I try to encourage women to go back to their old ways, as I would call it, is a safer way to call it. Being that stay-home mom is so important. Being feminine, being the nurturer of the family is so important. What do you feel that to get to where we need to be as conservatives, to have like a more truthful way of living, that a lot of these, the way to that is to have mothers gain their power back and their true nature back? What do
Absolutely.
you think about that?
I think that the women today are incredibly weak. I think the women who accused, led, supported the criminal trial of the owner of the Spanish soccer team, who in jubilation after seeing his girls soccer team win the national international competition, picked one of them up and gave her a 3-second non-sexual but excited kiss on the mouth. And then those women that pursued him into court saying that he's transgressed, he's violated her bodily autonomy, and it's encouraged a law to be passed, which just got passed 2 days ago in Spain, that states that without affirmation, meaning I want you to kiss me right now, without affirmation, a unsolicited kiss is considered a sexual assault, subject to, I think it's 2 to 3 years in prison. This is now a law in Spain as of this week. The women that drive that are weak, and they weaken all women. It is so insulting, it is so condescending to women to say that a woman who receives an unwanted kiss is so destroyed, so traumatized, and so weak that she can't raise her arm and push this man away and say, "No, please, I'm not into that right at the moment." That she can't tolerate something so minuscule. If she's that weak, how could she possibly tolerate childbirth? How could she defend her child against a bully? How could she speak up for her child at school? That requires tremendously more courage than turning the other cheek, literally turning the other cheek, when a man approaches her for a kiss that she didn't affirm. So I don't think it does women a service. I think it does them a disservice to turn against their traditional nature and to say that, we shouldn't have mothers, we shouldn't have parents. Women should just be working. Women should become like men. I think that weakens women.
It weakens women, but also men aren't really acting like men. And I think
Of course not.
they're not. And I think that's what makes women step up a little bit and start taking the masculine role. I think both sexes are doing a horrible job, and like what's going on is what we need to really process.
They're filling a
and think about.
vacuum
Yeah.
of lack
Yeah.
of masculinity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Men have become eunuchs.
Yes.
They have lost their cojones. And and when you have a
Yes.
eunuch in your family, in your business, in your political office, in your school, on your streets, as your coach, when you don't have a real man, as a woman, you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're
Yeah.
going to feel unsafe. You're going to want to jump in
Mhm.
to protect.
Yes.
And that is not your role in the long run. In certain times in history, women did jump and fill in. In World War II, all the men were gone. Industries, factories were left
Right.
idle. Women jumped in and they started working in the factories, and they did an excellent job. But that's not their role long term. That is their emergency position, their fallback. They don't want to take on that role in perpetuity. They knew that the war would end. And like, you know what? I'm just going to give up for a few years my role as a woman. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty and start,
As you should for your family.
making
if
bullets
you need
instead
to.
of cosmetics cases. Absolutely. But that's not what women are doing now. Women are taking over the role of men in perpetuity
And
because the men have
complaining that
left.
there's no
They're not available. My patients say that to me in the office.
They
These young
do?
women come in and say, I can't find a man to date.
Yeah, mine
Where
too.
are the real men? I don't know where they are. I go into a bar and I look around and all I see are men in man buns and skinny jeans and tight clothes. And they don't look physically
They-
strong. They don't make eye contact. They will not approach
They're
me.
scared.
They are
They're
scared and
scared.
intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a vicious cycle that's going around and around, and both sexes are losing. We have women who are becoming more masculine, despite the fact that they don't want to be because they don't see any masculinity anywhere.
Well, that's
we have
not our
men who are
natural
pulling away.
habitat.
It's not.
That's why we're so angry.
Women are in a bad mood now.
Yes.
And in this case, I think it is justifiable anger.
Yes, it
because
is.
they do not know where to find men anymore. They don't see them anywhere.
Correct.
But I have to, put the mirror back in them and say, your sex, women, you have led this, you have driven this, you have so driven men underground that they've just decided they're checking out. You've
Yes.
got to start to support. If you want more men, you need to start encouraging masculinity. You need to start encouraging men to offer unsolicited kisses. You need to encourage men to approach you, to say, you look amazing. What's your name? I want to take you out. Rather than rolling your eyes and screaming patriarchy, just because that guy may not have been the hottest guy that you've ever seen. Because you know what? He might be a great fit for someone else. You've got to start encouraging fathers to defend your daughters. So when a boy puts a skirt on and jumps, into the soccer game and gives your daughter a concussion in soccer,
Oh
you
my
need to encourage
gosh.
your father to pick up that guy and throw him over the fence. And women aren't doing that.
No.
And so
We're being agreeable to that. Well,
it's
some.
too much.
Some, not all.
Some, not all, but many of them are being agreeable. They're
Yes.
leading this. And then the men, obviously, they need to start stepping up, taking risks. And as men should, strong men, take those arrows. Accept that your role is not to be liked and loved and appreciated by everyone. Your role is to do good. And you might get injured emotionally, financially, socially. But if you do that, if you express courage and strength, women will see that. And strong women are attracted to strong men.
Yes.
Strong women do not want weak men. They want strong men.
We don't want to take on someone else's role.
course
Why? I want to be a woman. Let me be submissive. Let me be, the
That's right.
nurturer. This is what I've observed. I think that women can take more physical pain than men,
Absolutely.
but women cannot take more emotional pain than men.
You're right.
Men are more masculine, so they can take on stress more because they're providers, and providing requires a lot of work, a lot of hard work that triggers stress. Women, physical, men, they can take more stress.
It's a good point.
Yeah. I always observe, I'm like, well, that's why women are in bad mood. We're pushed to be these men. We are. We're pushed to like act like men, talk like men, walk like men, because we're missing the masculinity, excuse me. So of course that's gonna put us in a bad mood. Then there's this other piece too.
You cannot be a fulfilled woman expressing your femininity in the absence of masculinity. Oh my God, the women are already screaming, that's so patriarchal, that's chauvinistic, that's misogynistic. I can be everything I want to be without a
Oh
man.
yes.
Nonsense. You cannot express your femininity without masculinity. Think about art. You can't express light without having a shadow, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to have that contrast. That's just almost like laws of physics, laws of biology. This foolish notion that feminists push that you can become more of a woman by simply turning your backs on men and grabbing, stealing, inculcating the qualities that you admire or envious of in men is a lie. It will actually make you less of a woman. It'll certainly make you less happy.
Very unhappy.
It will prevent you from being able to surrender and fall into the strength of a male embrace, which is what is the most gratifying part of being a woman. I firmly believe, whether a woman will admit it or not, I know this is true psychologically, that every woman at some level, whether it's conscious, semi-conscious, or unconscious, every woman has a fantasy of surrendering to a strong man in the context of safety. Every single woman.
I will affirm. Because again, it's not in our nature to be fighters.
No.
It's our nature to be nurturers. There's a big difference. And when you're placed in that position outside of your role, it's a lot for a woman to handle. Emotionally, we get overwhelmed. And yeah.
You can't nurture when you're fighting.
No.
You can only nurture when you're safe. And you can't be
Yeah.
safe unless the man there that's with you
Yes.
is strong. A weak man
Yes.
will not provide you with a sense of safety. And if you don't feel safe, again, feel is important here. If you don't feel safe, you will not act in a nurturing way. And then you will not feel feminine, and you will not feel that you're a woman, and you will be bitter and angry and envious and nasty, and you will push people away. I see this so often that it's not even a theory for me anymore. It's so clear.
I have met so many women above 40 in their 50s, early 50s, full on depression.
Yeah.
And it makes me so angry that this kind of behavior, like, oh, go after your career, only your career, so who cares? Don't be a stay-at-home mom. Screw that. Why is that important? That's not important. That makes me so angry because I see what it does to women.
You see the consequences.
There
of
is
that
the
lie.
consequence. It is a lie. It's a lie that's, these young girls are being brainwashed at schools because of this idea. What is this? No. How many women have you met in their 50s that are like, oh my gosh, I regret not getting married? I have literally met 2 women like this. Full on depression, just sad, home. And you know what happens? They become psychologically messed up too.
They do.
It's not only let's talk about the aftermath of that too. What happens when you don't have a partner, when you don't have any meaningful conversations? Who are you gonna talk to? Your cats in your 4 walls? What is that? But then somebody will come and argue and say, well, you have friends. Well, your friends don't go home with you. They don't cuddle with you.
That's right.
You know how good it feels when you're making homemade sourdough and then you give it to your family to eat with a meal that you've made, and your husband kisses your hand and says, this was delicious. And your child says, Mom, can you make this again? I don't know, I get emotional just saying that, but that's the most meaningful thing, that it's God-given.
That provides a far more powerful experience than your boss acknowledging you at the board meeting for having written a great report.
Yes, and giving you a raise.
I
feel needed.
Yeah.
And when I feel needed, I feel that's purposeful. That's your purpose.
I would challenge any woman who has had that experience that you just described to deny its importance and to argue that their sense of purpose, meaning, and value in their life is more fulfilled by the accolades they receive in their work life. Yeah, from a stranger, somebody that just pays your salary. I really challenge that. I don't think that it's, obviously, maybe there's 1 or 2 in the country. There's always exceptions, but that's not the point. The point is that it is so nearly inconceivable and undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that women will protest this without thinking about it is evidence to how strong and powerful the brainwashing is
Mm-hmm.
that leads them to believe the contrary.
Yes. Fight with me on this. Your kid walks home and smells a home cooked meal. And I've watched my kids do this. I swear to God. And I just stand there watching them like, wow, like, look at what I just did. That was me. I did that.
Yeah.
Wow, who's going to do that for you in an office?
Nobody.
So I want every young woman to think about that image that your spouse is kissing your hand on the dinner table and your children are watching him do that. That's meaning. That's masculinity.
Yes, it
and
is.
that's yes.
And when my parents ask me now, what can I do to help save my child? I say three things. One, homeschool. Two, remove all the cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
No cell phones until age 18. And the
Mm-hmm.
third, which is what you just described and exemplified, is offer traditional male and female role models. Mom and dad, husband and wife, man, woman, masculine, feminine, through exactly those simple sorts of binary
Mm-hmm.
approaches that are complementary and that instill a sense of safety and admiration in the hearts and minds of the children so that as they grow up, they will start to model that behavior
Mm-hmm.
and, even more importantly, look for the opposite sex who can complement that behavior and who receives it. And then they don't have to go through years and years and years of online dating apps and misery and drugs and corporate adventures and misadventures, because they're going to be so focused on what they knew made mom and daddy happy that they're going to look for that when they're young, when they're in their teen years and their early college years.
Exactly.
You can't teach that by just giving lessons. It has to be modeled. It has to be done all the time.
Yes.
It has to be part of their life. Just like nutrition, just like exercise, just like sleep. It has to become a habit and so ingrained that if they do get assaulted, and they will, by all of the crazy ideology,
Mm-hmm.
they're just going to look at them and think, that doesn't even make sense to me.
That's right.
That doesn't resonate with me, because I had day after day seeing mommy and daddy helping each other, and I know that what you're telling me isn't. I know it's not true. You can't convince me of that.
Exactly.
That's what we need to do.
We need strong foundation in the homes. Feminism sucks. Traditional families are awesome, and they work.
That's so true.
Dr. McDonald, thank you for today. I know it was an intense conversation. Thank you. All right.